We have an exciting 2 days ahead of us. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists. We hope to have a great deal of audience participation over the next couple of days, and hopefully a lot of time for networking and interaction in the breaks and at the meals and at the cocktail reception tonight. I'm just going to make some very brief remarks and then turn it over to Doug Kenney, who, along with Catherine Mutz, has organized this conference. And a special thank you to Doug and Catherine for all the hard work that's been put into this. They have worked tirelessly over the last few months, and I think the success of the lineup that we have is directly attributable to their hard work. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this event. First of all, the Air, Water, Gas Sustainability Research Network, and I think Doug is going to have a few more words about them. And our first speaker, Patty Limerick, of course, is representing the network here today. Also like to thank the Environmentally Friendly Drilling Program at the Houston Advanced Research Center, the Energy Bar Association, which was very helpful in publicizing this event and encouraging people to attend, and also the law firm of Patrick Miller, Kropp and Noto in Aspen was a very generous contributor, financial contributor for the event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug, who will make some introductory remarks about the goals and the content of the conference over the next couple of days, and introduce our first speaker. So thanks very much, and Doug, over to you.
Thank you, Brett. Good morning, everyone. Let me reiterate and expand on what Brett said about the team that put this together. It does take a village to organize a conference, and Catherine Mutz in particular was very helpful, as were our colleagues in the Air, Water, Gas Sustainability Research Network. I also need to thank Sean, who many of you have had some dealings with now, for putting together the logistics, and you'll meet over the next 2 days our army of students, Jackson and Erica and Haley and Morgan and some others I probably haven't even met myself that are running around helping us. But I also wanted, before we start, to explicitly thank our speakers, because obviously you can't have an event without speakers, and we don't pay our speakers. A lot of organizations do pay their speakers, but we don't pay our speakers, and hopefully there's no speaker here going that this is the first they've heard of this. We always offer to cover the travel costs, and some speakers take advantage of that, but some even pay their own travel costs. And so we're very appreciative of the time and and the money that's involved in doing that. So we've been holding conferences here in June for 35 years now. I've been involved in about half of those, usually up until recently under the name of the Natural Resources Law Center. But as I hope you've come to appreciate now, we have changed our name to the Ketches Wilkinson Center, and in doing so, we've really expanded our focus. And I think this conference is a really good example of our expanded focus. We're going to talk about energy, we're going to talk about water, we're going to talk about air, we're going to talk about science and how it interacts with law. We're going to talk about issues as diverse as public health and national security and jobs and so on and so forth. This is kind of the direction that we're going with our organization, pulling more and more things together. And in doing that, we acknowledge that the topics like the one we're covering today are topics that are too big for a 2-day event. They're too big for a 2-month event, probably. But we're gonna do what we can. We're not gonna let perfect be the enemy of the good. We're gonna see what we can do. But before we launch in, let me say just a few things about logistics. As you can imagine, hosting, I think our registration is 175 people. Hosting 175 people is a little bit daunting from a logistical standpoint. And I've been waking up at 4 in the morning the last week thinking, oh, damn, we forgot about such and such, Then I saw on the news last night, they were talking about this being the 70th anniversary of D-Day. You know, it was supposed to be today, 70 years ago, June 5th. The weather wasn't good, so they postponed it and went on June 6th. And I'm thinking, you know, if you can stage 160,000 soldiers and get them across the English Channel in war, you know, I really probably shouldn't worry too much about a conference and if the coffee is of the right temperature or something like that. So I think, you know, I think we'll get by on the arrangements that we've made. The agendas are in your packet. You'll note that one of the things we do at our events, we have a lot of breaks, and they're long breaks. And it's not because we're lazy, it's because we've come to appreciate that one of the main benefits, and some would argue the main benefit of our events, is often just the chance to meet your colleagues and to catch up with colleagues and do some networking in the halls. So I hope you'll enjoy the breaks and the snacks, which I think you've all figured out are in the room next door. We'll serve you lunch today and tomorrow in the cafeteria, which is essentially just right above us, one floor up. It's a nice facility. You'll like that. I hope you figured out all the parking issues. I know there people were out there trying to direct you. The bathrooms and the drinking fountains are all at the far end of the building on each floor. They're all stacked, so to speak. There's guest Wi-Fi, which I think you should be able to log into. If not, let us know, and we'll try to figure out what the trick is to that. But, you know, as far as, I think that's pretty much it with logistics. You're going to get an evaluation form about this event as an email. I think it's going to direct you to like an online survey type thing. And we look at those pretty closely, so please take those seriously. But, you know, if there's something that's of great concern to you about our event that we can fix now rather than later, be sure to corner me or someone else and let us know as the day goes on. But I think that's it for logistics. So we will launch into the program maybe a minute or two early. This will probably be the only time in the program that we are early, but so let's celebrate that a little bit. Let me start by introducing then our first speaker, and I'm learning the procedure as we go, but I guess we need to mic up. Is Patty mic'd up? Patty's mic'd up. Her PowerPoint is here. Let me say a few words about Patty. I'm not one to give detailed introductions because in your packet there are bios for all the speakers. So I hope if you don't know a speaker, I hope you'll read the bio because I wasn't planning on reading it back to you. And Patty, as they say, is one of these people that needs no introduction. But so I won't say much about Patty except to say that she's been a colleague and friend for probably 15 years, something like that. And she's the outreach director of the Air, Water, Gas Sustainability Research Network, who I've mentioned is a partner in this event. So we're very appreciative of that. And she's also the director of the Center of the American West. And I got to say, Patty, every time I say that, when I say the Center of the American West, I think I picture this marker on the ground somewhere, maybe in Utah. That would be the geographic center of the American West. Because I've seen such a marker near Lebanon, Kansas, which is presumably the geographic center of the continental United States. But yes, the center of the American West is not the geographic center in Boulder. And being in Boulder, it certainly isn't the political or cultural center of the American West. But yeah, it's the political center of Boulder County, perhaps. But the organization and Patty, I think, qualify as centrist in the sense that it is an organization that's focused more on finding common values more so than flaming divergent positions, and is more interested in bringing people together than in dividing them. And I think that that mindset is a challenge when talking about oil and gas development, just because there's so many strong opinions. And I think that's really why we asked Patty to start today, to say a little something about the challenge of having good, productive discussions on this subject where people have such strong opinions. And so I think Patty's going to offer some thoughts on that. She's maybe going to offer us a little friendly guidance about how we should behave as we talk. Well, let me temper that with I see that she's brought are they presents or are they prizes? Well, so you have to do something to get these. Okay, so there will be some sort of physical challenge at the end of her talk, and there will be an award ceremony of some sort. Okay, all right. So that's all I have. Patty, come on up.
Yes, I am. I just want to say Center of the American West. It is a preposterous name, and it was actually inspired from being an assistant professor at Harvard, where the American Studies department was called American Civilization. So when you walk by there, you would hear somebody answering the phone, and they would pick up the phone and go, American Civilization. And you think, that's really funny. I wondered where it was, and that's where it is. So it's the same amusement when people answer the phone at the center and say, Center of the American West. You think, well, that's preposterous, but it's kind of compelling in its own way. I want to note that my title in the program, I left out the word tackling. It's framing the discussion tackling issues of uncertainty, terminology, and sensitivity. And apparently, that must have been a Freudian omission, because the word tackling must have seemed conflictual in a way that I am trying to avoid. So I understand I am tackling, but apparently I'm defiant on whether I'm going to tackle or not. I'm very grateful to Doug for that introduction, and to Catherine Mutz and to Britt, who is Catherine and Doug I've known for ages, and I've only known you for a little bit, but we've just met and you're already teasing me unmercifully in private conversation. So I take that to be a very good sign. So welcome, it's a treat to have you among us. Let me quickly explain the method to my madness today. This presentation explores some matters of context that make the project of designing and implementing regulations on oil and gas into such a challenge. The core problem is a very subjective, very humanities, maybe psychology department problem, which is a failure of trust. And that is not an easy matter to re-engineer on. This weekend, I'm doing a program on Rocky Flats, and there you can see the contractors who took over Rocky Flats, and also Department of Energy people saying repeatedly, now you must trust us. We have changed. Now you must trust us. And we know from Rocky Flats that declaring now you must trust us is not an effective way to restore trust. But there are, I think, ways to restore trust, and I hope I'm putting some of those forward today. I also believe that there are excesses of certainty on all sides of this issue. People claim confident knowledge of things that, as far as I understand, as a visitor to the sciences, those are not pieces of territory where there is a foundation for confident knowledge, so I'll try to speak a little bit on that. I will also make a case for the proposition that our own conduct today and tomorrow could advance the cause for the productive public conversation on these difficult matters. So I hope I can be persuasive on that. I will be speaking what you mentioned on how regulation must be in some relationship to scientific expertise, but that is a complicated matter. And then at the end, I will have a really strange proposition that will maybe seem as if I've lost my mind, but I think there's substance in what that last proposition is. So you don't have to think that. Although I'll ask you right now, during those abundant breaks, tell me anything that you think about what I've said and whether it made sense or not, but I'm particularly interested in what you think about that last proposition, which you haven't heard yet, so you haven't thought anything yet. So about that. Okay. I begin here with James Madison, because one way I calm myself when I think about this vexing issue and the difficulty we have speaking about it in public, I think, what would that old Madison say? It's interesting, there are 3 new biographies of him, one by Lynn Cheney. Lynn Cheney and I do not agree on everything, but we agree on the significance of James Madison. So that's cool. But I do return to Madison a lot because he I guess I will use the present tense, he is a foremost thinker on federalism, and yet he lived in a world that we might have to envy, because his principal preoccupation when he brooded about federalism was the relationship between the states and the federal government. Wouldn't it be nice if that's all we had to brood about? I'm not sure if it would be, in what sense it would be nice, but it would be cognitively simpler, because now, of course, we are just as engaged and concerned with issues of municipalities, counties, and, of course, tribes. And so Madison's world looks restful, which is hard to say about the American Revolution, but comparatively restful. And, of course, Madison struggled with faction, which he defined as a number of citizens, whether amounting to a minority or a majority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest. So that has some bearing now, and I do find myself wishing for his guidance. I'm sorry, this is embarrassing. I think it's the first time in my life I've ever done this. I'm going to quote Wikipedia, I think. Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's too embarrassing to quote Wikipedia. Oh, no, here it is. Okay, so here is what Wikipedia said. I thought, I'm reading my friend Drew McCoy, who's a wonderful scholar of Madison and the early Republic, and he's writing chapters on this, and Wikipedia puts it in a sentence, so I'm going with him. Like most of his contemporaries, Madison changed his political views during his life. During the drafting and ratification of the Constitution, he favored a strong national government, though later he grew to favor stronger state governments before settling between the two extremes late in life. So, President Madison, I salute you for wobbling around and then finding some kind of angle of repose between extreme positions. Here, just to remind you, in case anyone was forgetting why this is a difficult subject for public discourse, two things that are both called documentaries, so I think it's kind of a humorous play on the word documentary in both cases. Gasland, that's two, but there's also, of course, part one, The Answer, Fact Nation, neither of them exactly tied to narrow factuality. Such a difficult time to be having these conversations. Two forms of fracturing coincide. These are two books that probably I think I'm the only person in the world who would be paying attention to both of these. The first book over here is by my friend Daniel Rogers, who's an historian at Princeton, who wrote about the breakdown of common ground, common beliefs, common ideas in the last 30 or 40 years, but interestingly used the term age of fracture for his title, and then juxtaposed to that, the frackers. So we have two forms of fracturing coinciding. Now, we begin on terminology. You know you have a tough subject when simply choosing the word you will use can tangle you up and get you categorized as someone you may or may not think you are. So, FRAC without the K or with the K, that's been a dilemma for anybody trying just to speak on the subject. If you use the K, or write on the subject, if you use the K, it seems to be the pejorative, anti-development K there. It's a lot to put on one consonant, but that's what happens. Our FRACING is the industry's preference on that. I was pleased to find that this poor man, I don't know if he thinks he has an easy job, but he's the editor of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. They decided recently to add fracking to their dictionary, and the poor souls, they didn't consult, I guess, or maybe they did, and they just plunged ahead. He used the K, but he did it with the justification without the K, it would be read with a soft C of fracing. I would say, I think as I understand phonetics, it would be phrasing, actually, because the one letter itself, phrasing isn't going to work as a term. So they chose to put the K, but this poor man thinks he can dodge this by saying that this is more phonetic than ideological. Good luck with that. Most of the time, I just go for 6 syllables, hydraulic fracturing, in hopes of escaping that whole tangle. But I yearn for a world where I could just use 2 syllables, and the unfortunate similarity of this word to another word in common usage hasn't helped. So my dream every now and then is, what if we could just get another word, but no such luck. So why did the planning committee give me this opportunity? And of course, I sort of served on the planning committee, so it's obviously to put it that way. I think because what I've been doing since February of 2013 is this act, the Balancing Act. The Southern American West is neutral on the subject of fracking and our role of outreach. This young lady had training. This young lady had great coaches who instructed her on this. In our world, we teach ourselves. We have to learn ourselves, and it is an endless process of reorchestrating and recalibrating what we were doing on that balance beam. So, for this is just to explain again why I'm up here. We have done a series called Fracking Stints, starting in February of 2013. We have arranged and conducted forums on hydraulic fracturing and natural gas development in a bunch of arenas, Fracking Stints being our main one. And it has given me a chance to develop expertise in how we as a society get our signals crossed and how we can get them uncrossed on this subject. I've been able to watch closely on how we lose our footing and how we can regain our footing. And as I said before, trust is a very slippery, very subjective concept, but it is also a big, consequential, unavoidable concept. So, for instance, in the fracking series, some of you may have heard this to satiation, my strategy is not in any way to suppress the fact of conflicting points of view. I always begin fracking sense, and I could do that now, I suppose, of saying the Center of the American West encourages dissent and protest. So if you disagree with the speaker, you should express that. But we require you, well, I guess we can't require you, we plead with you to stick to respiratory protest. So we ask you to sigh with exasperation, to snort with irritation and contempt, even to hiss if that becomes necessary. But none of those forms of protest interrupt your neighbor's ability to hear the speaker. So that's why we prefer that. Unfortunately, actually in Greeley, that was very funny. In Greeley, they all started hissing me when I did that. So that's appropriate. So that is why I think I'm here, because I have had some trial by fire opportunities here. Here is an example. We've also gone to Greeley, where we have done 3 programs in Greeley. We made a bunch of shuttle diplomacy visits, probably 6 visits, to meet people and recruit them into our cause. After many diplomatic ventures, this is still the world that I live and maneuver in. This is an article from the Greeley Tribune. We had persuaded Mayor Tom Norton to let the city be a co-sponsor for our series. And so here Mayor Norton says he thinks this is a good idea, that we're going to have this series. The reporter observes what everybody in the world would know, that Boulder isn't the first place that Greeley residents might guess the city would look for a fair and uncontentious forum on the highly debated oil and gas industry. But Mayor Norton welcomed us in, saying that he feels Limerick has proven herself as a fair academic, and he thinks the forum will result in understanding on all sides. But look at that last line there. Still, he said he will be the first to criticize the forums if he feels they lean in a biased way. The lady on the balance beam? But she'll just fall a few feet, and I will fall into Mayor Norton's zone of condemnation, so don't care to do that. Now, why did they tolerate Boulderites? Why did they invite us in? Because, in fact, this was a sentence we heard in many different versions, but same content. We need a conversation in this town, and no one else can convene this. So that was us. Here are our co-sponsors. I'm proud of this. City of Greeley, CU, KUNC, Mineral Resources, which is one of the locally based companies drilling in Greeley, Synergy, one of the locally based companies drilling in Greeley, the Greeley Tribune, the UNC Faculty Task Force on Hydraulic Fracturing, which is not they're looking into the subject, but they came into existence because the president of UNC, Kay Norton, leased some fracking sites on the campus. So those 2 groups are taking different angles on that. And then Well, Air, and Water, which is the community group that is raising big questions about development. All of those groups agreed to be co-sponsors, and I'm endlessly grateful to them for that. Well, it's going to get livelier, depending on what happens with negotiations and legislative sessions reconvening, but it is not going to be calmer on this subject as we head towards the November election. That seems a pretty safe guess. Okay, so now we are going to get at problems of trust and clear decision-making. Stipulated that policy-making, regulation creation, design and implementation of regulation must stand in some relationship to scientific expertise. But that is a really complicated relationship. I am in no way blaming the experts for this. In fact, in a moment here, I'll maybe blame the people who are expecting things from experts more than the experts themselves. Scientific experts have a very tough dilemma these days. One of those dilemmas just emerges from site variation. The subsurface does not come in a standard issue repeated pattern. So you can do a study of a particular locale and come up with a very sound observation of that locale, and that will not necessarily translate to another locale. So there are limits to any one-size-fits-all kind of scientific finding or understanding or interpretation of scientific finding. There is currently a hair-trigger societal response to discredit studies if you can find any suggestion of bias or predetermined conclusions or questionable affiliations in the people who produce that research. That has to be lived with. There's maybe maybe 5-second honeymoon period when the study releases its finding, and then that form of critique starts in. There are people, and this I would say is the major problem, there are people expecting too much from expertise, assuming and frequently saying that when the scientific findings are complete, then we will know what to do. Then we will be able to make our decisions in a very solid, very confident way. Well, what this is not doing a great job on, that expectation, is recognizing uncertainty. So, and just the difficulty of the public pushing and pulling at scientists to go in the direction to reach the conclusions that confirmation bias would want them to hear, that hope that they will say what and confirm what we were already thinking. So this is not a universally popular analogy here, but I stand by it. This is poor little Daniel Radcliffe, who was besieged and pulled at by the public in a manner a little bit similar to how scientists can be pulled at, a little bit different as well. And this is his bodyguard, Sam. And Daniel Radcliffe cannot go into public without Sam there to push away through the crowd and to navigate for him. I believe it's a very direct analogy. Not everyone would concur with that, but you need somebody from the humanities, a group like the South American West, to play the Sam role, to help the scientists maneuver through this pushing and pulling of society at them. So in this slide, I am represented by the rather striking bodyguard there. Now, why are you laughing? That seems, the similarity seems so clear. Maybe we should look back at that. See? Yeah, you can see the same. Okay, I'll do more upper body work. I swear I will. So, and this is, of course, the crux of where the dilemma of the experts comes in. It is hard to translate quantitative findings into words. This is a slide that one of the kids at the center found for me, but there's the dilemma. So here's the disconnect in expectation. The public wants scientists to provide studies that deliver certain and unambiguous results that will set a clear path for decisions. And yet, very much to their credit, scientists and engineers are people who recognize uncertainty and note that by always referring to the margin of error in their findings. Their quantitative results, I say usually, but I don't know that, I think almost without exception, come with error bars. So how do we bridge this cognitive divide? This is why it's fun to have humanities involved. You can try. I don't personally know what to do about the societal dilemma of innumeracy. I don't know what should happen in K through 12 to help with scientific literacy, so I cannot help with that. But I can help with, I think I can help, with an unusual way to invite the public to consider the factor of uncertainty in scientific findings. Here's the hope. So the dream here is that we have this place called the error bar, and at least symbolically, we invite the public to stop in and visit at the error bar. And in the error bar, the same conversations occur that occur in other bars, but they occur in the framework that suits our purposes. So when the young gentleman says to the young lady, "Have I seen you here before?" She says, "We can do an algorithm on that." And then they put in their variables and their factors, and then she says, "I believe there is 11 in 100 chances that we have seen each other before, plus or minus 3. So that's life in the error bar. Few permanent relationships may come out of that, but God willing, some sense of what we're talking about when we talk about uncertainty and quantitative findings comes out. This phrase I have loved. This is a writer in the New York Times a little while ago, just making this incredibly valuable, under-acknowledged statement. With every error bar, a scientist admits the uncertainty and admits what she or he cannot say with certainty and what they therefore have to say, "I don't know." So here's this great phrase. I also recall how the words that most convey authority and credibility whenever I listen to a pundit or expert speak are, "I don't know." So in that spirit, one example of that, no, actually, I'm doing pretty well time-wise. I want to just refer to the remarkable power of one question that I have seen derail productive conversation over and over and over. And it is a slippery slope, and it's just one little slip, and you're there. First, I will say, as an historian, I have thousands of case studies to prove that human beings are not great when it comes to exact predictions of the future. Okay. So what happens is that a discussion of the role of natural gas inches and then leaps into a discussion of what is the timetable for the future transition to renewable energy. And that's an important topic, and it's certainly worth discussing. But the pattern that it follows, if you're in this zone, is that the person who is not enthusiastic about about oil and gas development, or excuse me, about gas development, will say, we could be at renewables in 10 years if we made that our choice. At which point the person from the oil and gas industry says, it's going to be 100. I swear to you, it's going to be 100. And then there you are. There you go. There's substance and productivity of conversation out the window, and you are having a not illuminating conversation about predicting the future with certainty. I don't know, but I hope this, or I fear this, or I yearn for that. That might save us, but I have seen really good opportunities for conversation go down with that. Here is a quick matter on public health. This is my Surgeon General's warning. If you are susceptible to hypertension, or if you have an intense response to stress, talking about studies of the public health impacts of oil and gas development could be hazardous to your health. It ignites very fast. No wonder it ignites so fast. Oh, let's see, my poor, it did not work, was putting this on this slippery surface. I am not an engineer, but I know that is the problem. You hang out with engineers and you get, okay, so now it's working. Okay, so here we have a dilemma, that public health is the field of study that matters most to people. It is the place of the most seemingly intractable disconnect. The scientist cannot, in this case the public health scholar, cannot ask a population to stay in proximity to an oil and gas well for 20 years, to not move, to have regularly measured exposures, to have frequent medical checkups and to make those records available, and after 20 years say, here's what we found in affliction or higher rates of mortality. You can't do that. And so you have to do something much more tentative. You have to look at the chemicals that might be in a place, that exposures that might be happening, and you identify the chemicals that are known to risk human health, and then you calculate how potential exposure, probable or potential exposure to that might produce certain afflictions or dangers. So then you put out findings, which most often are in terms of association or correlation. Anxious people are not in your world as a public health scholar, so anxious people will read that and will think, is that me? Is that my relative? Is that my neighbor? So that presents a very difficult matter of translation. And again, I feel very empathetically about the public health scholars working on that. I'm hoping to do anything I can to make sure that we help in that interpretation of quantitative material into words. So with that in mind, and just if I had a kind of a, I don't know what, just a magic moment with a fairy princess thing, I would just ask for that. Just have the American public wake up to the meaning of the word association and the meaning of the word causation. With that, I think we could have a enhanced conversation. So I'm getting close here. Here's where I had a moment of thought on risk that has changed me. Our third program in Greeley was at Northridge High School. This actually looks closer when you're on the ground there. There was a rig there. I looked at that rig, I looked at the high school. I was told that the track is pretty close to that rig. The setback begins where the building is. And I realized that one thing I had not been paying proper attention to is that the one thing that we know about human beings is that they care about their children and they worry about their children's well-being. So that made me think we have to accommodate that. The calculations of risk by exposure and so on, that's not going to settle the mind of a worried parent. Now, what we're to do with that, I don't know, but it is just an important recognition that the formula that social scientists have used, that risk equals hazard plus sense of powerlessness and vulnerability, that has to be in our calculations of risk. We must try to reduce the hazard, but we must also try to address and acknowledge and then address that sense of powerlessness and vulnerability. So here I was going to put in a few cheerful attempts and troubles, but I'm out of close to time, so I'm going to contract on that. But I do want to say that I have some thoughts about what might happen if we as a society chose to put different expectations and procedures in place in urban and residential areas in contrast to rural areas because of this matter of density and the exposure of families and children. But I will come back to that if anybody's interested in hearing that. And then I also just want to go back to that phrase about confirmation bias, how much the atmosphere in a room improves when people are attending to confirmation bias and making choices. If the speaker said something that confirmed what I already agreed, how much should I let that sense of agreement control my reaction and my understanding to that? Okay, my last ridiculous idea here. What would Monty Python do with a fracking movie? This is a question that doesn't seem to make any sense or be worth asking, but we have these recent studies on humor and the value of humor. Humor is our natural response to living in a world filled with conflict. Well, where are we if not with that? And these are my fracking limericks that have been universally loved by people of every possible point of view. Knowledge is tragically lacking on the complicated practice of fracking. Convinced they are right, people rush into fight, and no agency regulates yakking. And my autobiographical one, when you try to be neutral on fracking, you're a quarterback set up for sacking. You can assert and declare that you're going to be fair, but you still won't escape frequent whacking. So those, I swear to you, field testing, every group, Well, Air and Water, Colorado Oil and Gas Association, there is a warm and hearty and pleasant response to those limericks. So I do not think it is the baddest idea to think of how to use humor. Okay, so here are the prizes. We have copies of this book on the Denver Water Department. Interesting lessons. Water utilities and oil and gas development. Interesting lessons there. So the prizes are for the best limerick, original limerick. You can't just use either of those. Those are very good, but you have to do your own. The best conversational performance in avoiding the pitfalls and snarls that we have spoken of the terminology and the excessive expectations of science and so on. The best tranquil statement of disagreement to groups, to people who have met, listened to each other and said, here is where we disagree with precision and tranquility. Here is the place where we disagree. And the most illuminating experiment with the phrase, I don't know. But I yearn, or I hope, or whatever you certainly could title to that. So these prizes are, you can't, if you want this prize, you have to do it today to win the prize. Very winnable prizes, really. Maybe a little bit more time for the limerick. That requires a little bit more. Well, no, that's not right. I mean, actually, all of these are effort-laden. If you are not able to get these together today, we could go to tomorrow morning for that. So that is my hope, that I will have to go back to the center of the American West, where not to Leavenworth, Kansas, or whatever that place was, but to get more copies, because we will have so many contestants for the prizes that we'll need more of those. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. 2 minutes.
All right. Why don't you take a question? While you do that, Sean, why don't you get Stuart set up for
I
next
have 2.5 minutes.
Just one note on questions. Let's make sure that you have the mic so that we can get it recorded for the video. Any questions?
Or expressions of dismay or hisses or... There we go.
Thank you. I think your presentation was wonderful. I just had a question. There seems to be a power imbalance here between citizens and industry, and we have, nearly unlimited resources on one side. We have all the experts being basically trained within industry by industry. We have a regulatory system which, while it's been changing recently, was dominated by industry until 2007. And I'm wondering why balance and non-confrontation is so important, and why, what benefit it would be to people who are seeking to fight back against this imbalance. How is it beneficial to them to adopt your style?
Oh, thank you. That's a wonderful question, very thought-provoking. In Greeley, when we had those co-sponsors, I would ask the people representing those different groups to stand at the start of the program so that I could thank them and we could all thank them for that. That wasn't a well-thought-out strategy on my part. Since then, and I don't think I'm violating anyone's confidence, all I wanted to do was just say, here they are. I have heard from the groups that you are thinking of that that was a great moment for them, that they felt acknowledged, they felt recognized, that they were standing with everybody as co-sponsors, that they had voices that should be heard. So I think that was my moment of when I got the messages from them that had meant something to them, that they felt they had literally standing. I thought, well, there's a moment where just that we want to hear everyone gives that opportunity. I totally get, it's a deep irony of my life that I started college in 1968 and I was a protester and I shouted down speakers and I did exactly the kind of thing that I'm not doing now. But I feel that I made that choice because the people taking sides, that was overstaffed. And the people trying to say, could we give this a hearing? So I believe it was useful. I don't want to overstate this in any way, but I hope it will be useful that in Greeley, when I met with a few of the parents who are concerned about the proximity to schools, I was a more alert and awakened person to how that feels so that I can better represent that in circles where it probably wouldn't be represented otherwise. So it's subtle, and I so do not want to be an advocate of a group hug and a singing of Kumbaya. I'm so tired of that sorry, I'm speaking with unusual hostility about, if you would like to sing Kumbaya, I'm sure Doug will lead you in that. That would be fun. That would be lovely. I just will be stepping out of the room to see if I have any messages while you sing Kumbaya. But I do think we create an arena, the Senate of the American West, we create an arena where people do feel safer on all sides to speak and to know. Well, I'll just say that there have been several times at Senate of the American West events where I have asked somebody who I think has shifted to an ad hominem attack to dial that back, take a minute, and then I would recognize them again and they can come back to the substance. So I think, you know what, I just think we are so in short supply on moderators and umpires and referees, and that has to benefit all the teams. Because if you think, I mean, it's a bad problem in football now with concussions. Think of the concussion rate if you didn't have referees and umpires there. So, but I understand that that's a function. And that's what I guess I really hope for, this best tranquil statement of disagreement. I can't just say I only want to hear one side on that. That's an occasion for people to actually do. This will be my last remark. Dan Kemmis, the former mayor of Missoula, who was also in the state legislature in Montana, is the author of that famous remark that the one thing, it's an ironic term, public hearings, because the one thing that never happens at a public hearing is hearing. Listening, that you're just waiting for the other side to stop talking so you can say that. So I think this role of the balance and the let's hear it and let's not be shouting people down, and so that does actually permit something that comes pretty darn close to listening and hearing. So I'd love to talk to you more about that, because that's where I need to be thinking as hard as I can. So, okay, bye, thanks.
Thank you, Patty. And I do appreciate your slide with the Monty Python players, favorite of mine. If they were moderating this session, they would come to the podium now and say, now for something completely different, because we're going to talk about engineering now. And again, it's what's that? Yeah, well, we could work that in as well, sure. And a bit of a little disadvantage in that I've known Patty for 15 years at least. Our next two speakers I didn't meet until an hour ago, so I don't have any good funny stories to tell you about these people. I will confess, just as Patty confessed to consulting Wikipedia, I will confess that I Googled the next two speakers, and speaking of terrible terms, Googling someone is a terrible term, by the way. But I Googled the next two speakers. The next speaker, Stuart Ellsworth. And again, there's the bios in your packet. I encourage you to look at those. Okay. Petroleum engineer, has worked all over the world, and is currently working with the COGCC, which if you Google, you will learn is the Church of God Colorado Conference, which of course,
10 minutes extra for.
seems an odd affiliation for a petroleum engineer, but. And of course, it's the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And I laugh because for years here we were the Natural Resources Law Center, or the NRLC, and people would Google us, and then if you Google that, you come up with the National Right to Life Committee, which was again quite a different thing than what we were doing. Thank you. And so it looks like I've stalled long enough. Sean's got the presentation here. We've asked Stuart to do what I think is a fairly unmanageable topic, is to get us all up to a common understanding of the engineering of how development is done in these shale plays, and where along these processes there is potential for issues to water and air quality issues to arise. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I was given the task of talking about, Engineering 101. I tried to morph that a little bit to talk about sort of the industry growth and change and give some background of kind of what we're seeing. And the biggest thing we're seeing here in Colorado is we're experiencing an unprecedented growth and change in the oil and gas industry. And hopefully I can kind of set the stage a little bit as your discussions progress over the next 2 days. As far as, I know you'll be talking about the health impacts, the air, the emissions, traffic, noise, and the sustainability of this industry. One of the key points is that in that background is the fact that industry has been spending billions of dollars lately to extract this oil and gas. At the same time, our oil production is at a 50-year high, and the public revenues from that are at $1.6 billion. Much of that revenue goes directly to the local governments, to our schools, and to the public works projects. What I'd like to try to answer today, or at least begin to answer the discussion, is sort of what's different today, what are some of those issues related to onshore development, and why should we care? I'm Stuart Ellsworth, the engineering manager at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and we're the regulatory agency on oil and gas. So to begin, I'd like to talk about what's different today. It's the reservoir that we're extracting the oil and gas from. One of the sort of expressions I say is, this is not your grandfather's oil and gas industry. In order to develop this resource, it takes a development plan to drill and produce these oil and gas. In other words, we need a forward-thinking plan right from the beginning, and also the economics as we move forward. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this is where it's kind of interesting to hear Patty speak in the kind of the humanities side of things, whereas I guess I'm really going to be quite a bit different in that I'll be a little more on the engineering side, and maybe this gives a characterization of kind of the two discussions as we move forward. But in the past, that grandfather's oil and gas industry was developing what we call a conventional resource. In other words, the reservoir, the geology we were drawing from, had permeability, it had porosity, it had oil and gas in a manner in which it was able to free flow. The best analogy I can give to you is a soda pop can. So we've got that soda pop, it's constrained within the can or bottle, and the gas is in solution. And if you kind of shake it, you've sort of energized it. If you open that can, we all know that the gas comes flowing out, along with it all the liquid. Well, that's exactly what happens in a conventional resource. We've got gas in solution, we've got our drill bit, it punctures that container, the reservoir, and the gas flows to that reservoir and lifts the liquid out. In an unconventional resource, none of that is present. We have extremely low porosity, micropores that aren't connected by any pathway permeability. We have to alter those rocks and the formation to allow them to flow. Colorado has a rich history, actually, in those unconventionals. You can go back to back into the Wattenberg field here in North Metro Denver. Our D and J sands of the 1980s were actually tight sands that were hydraulically fractured. By the late 1980s, million-gallon hydraulic fracturing jobs were occurring there. These were tens of feet thick, the D and the J sands. Next, in the 90s, we took that same sort of technology over to the Piceance Basin. But one thing that was different is that sand fluvial section of what's called the Wasatch and Mesa Verde Formation were thousands of feet thick. So they did the hydraulic fracturing treatment on that full section, and the treatment went to the one zone where the fracture initiated. So what they did is they created a set of packers so they could isolate the treatment so it went to a 300 or 500 foot zone. Stage fracking is what that is. So that began in the 90s. There's actually a study by some fellows at Los Animas Laboratories called the M site in the 90s that did that. Next, I don't want to go into it because it's a little bit different, but we had the unconventional plays of the coal bed methanes in the southern half of the state in our San Juan, Durango area, and the Trinidad Raton Basin. Those are considered unconventional plays. But in the 2000s, we started seeing the combination of horizontal drilling with the designs of downhole motors to create the lateral path combined with the stage fracking, and that's where we got to the ability to develop these shale plays of like the Niobrara in the northeast and a couple places. The Niobrara is developed up here in the northwest and also in the southwest portions of the state. Interesting, it's actually a depositional where it changes to a straight shale formation, and the Mancos here in the Piceance Basin. So what Colorado has is a rich history dating back to the 1980s to today of unconventional resources. The tight sands in the Piceance and the Wattenberg area, the coal bed methanes, and the shale plays of the Niobrara and Mancos. The difference in the shale plays is those were always considered source rocks, where the oil and gas were originally generated. So with the advent of the horizontal well, stage fracking, those source rocks have become reservoirs, but they're called self-sourcing reservoirs. But the design, when we had a conventional, the oil was able to free flow. One of the challenges the legal group has is defining the well spacing and the pooling of that resource. But one of the other challenges that we need to move forward from is that we have to have a forward-thinking development plan on how to develop these resources. So as we move forward in these shale plays, one has to have a development plan to develop these unconventional resources. You need to know the science of things as far as the horizontal hole, the lateral length, the geometry of it. In other words, do I drill, as you see in this display, we got all kinds of geometries. Lengths of the lines are various. The direction at which they're placing are varied. All of that comes into play. And of course, the economics related to the lateral length. The hydraulic fracturing treatment, the design of how much fluid to use, the staging of that treatment, the geomechanics of that rock, and also the centralization, meaning the combination of multiple wells on a well pad, the combination of multiple tanks and facilities at one location. Just kind of giving you a little bit of the kind of science perspective, one will drill a vertical hole first. They'll do their science of it, getting an understanding. This is geophysical logs, and from that, they can then calculate rock mechanic properties. They can also, and ultimately what they'll get is this equation, a stress model. And the idea is to find the confining layers for the hydraulic fracturing treatment so it's confined and extends laterally. And of course, we use the seismic data to get some of those parameters. We also use the seismic data to place that hole. Now, trying to give you a characterization of what we're seeing in our permitting. This is a kind of a zoomed in section of our staff report. And the biggest thing I want to point out is, I know it's hard to see, but if we look at 2009, we had 3% of our oil and gas wells drilled in Colorado were horizontal wells. If we now take a look at 2013, we have almost 62% of our wells are horizontal wells. So we've seen a dramatic change in the drilling and permit activity. The next point I want to talk about is how a well is designed. The objective of the design is sort of a twofold protection. The first part of the hole is what we call the surface hole. So that's this portion. And what I'm trying to highlight here is the fact that the first part of a hole is to drill and isolate those freshwater zones so that we protect our groundwater. Once we've got our groundwater isolated and protected, we can then drill the second part of the hole, which is the steel. Both of the gray represents cement and the black represents a steel casing. That steel casing is about 1/4 of an inch thick. So after we place this cement in the hole and the steel for the surface casing, isolating the freshwater zones, an operator can begin drilling the vertical portion of the hole, where they'll again drill down to the hydrocarbon zones and seal off those zones. The objective of this design is that all fluids have been isolated and sealed off. That means freshwater, salt water, and hydrocarbons. All fluids are required to stay in their formation of origin. Now, of course, I'm showing a vertical well. If you are a horizontal well, just before you would enter your producing zone, the drill bit will turn by downhole motors and go lateral the distance your permit lease are. We can verify that downhole construction by what's called a cement bond log. This is an acoustic log that'll tell us where the cement is placed. And of course, you can see this is an acoustic graph, and you can see where it's changed, indicating where the presence of that downhole cement is. Next, I want to talk about sort of drilling and production, some of our drilling times, rig activity, and some of the numbers what we're seeing in the activity. First off, as far as drilling times, one of the things I want to point out, in that grandfather's oil and gas industry, we were talking weeks and months to drill an oil and gas well. Today's wells, these horizontal wells you're hearing about, are drilled in and around 6 to 7 days. The next part is the completion part. That's what we call the hydraulic fracturing part. That takes about 3 days. Now, that's on a per well basis. Taking a look at the rig activity, it's very interesting when you take a look at the rig activity for the last several years. I kind of try to do it this way. If we go back to 2003, we can see the ramping up to 2008, where we had about 135 rigs active in Colorado. That was the vertical wells. A lot of them were in the Piceance Basin. And so we had single well pads. Of course, we can see the economic decline of 2008 and a slow ramp up of activity, where we're now operating at about 65 rigs in the state. So what I want you to, and I already showed you that most of those, 62%, are horizontal wells. So I want you to hang on to that 2-to-1 ratio as I walk through this discussion. The next point is I want to talk about is the permitting. These stats are on our website if you want to take a look. The next thing I want to point out is we see the same trend when we look at the permits. In 2008, we received 8,000 permits. Economic decline, it dropped off, and last year we had 4,000 permits. But if you take a look at this green line, we can see that same trend where over 2,200 permits were horizontal permits. So again, you kind of see that almost 2-to-1 ratio. So what are the issues as onshore development is occurring here in the United States and, of course, here in Colorado? We have had increased regulations. There's a lot of public concern. We hear about that every day. There is renewed interest in domestic drilling here in the United States, and we're seeing a big move towards the multi-well pad and the centralized facility. As far as the regulations, if we go back about 15 years, we can start to see some of that trend change in how people are operating in the state. In 1998, the GWA, Greater Wattenberg area, that's the oil and gas activity between Greeley and Metro Denver, the Wattenberg field. At that time, we began discussions on centralized facilities. We call it the 5-spot. The center of the quarter sections and the center of the section created the 5 spots. So we have drilling, the intent to consolidate drilling activity in one location so we can reduce that surface impact. Next, in the Ignacio Blanco field, this is the San Juan Basin near Durango, we began the discussion of wellbore monitoring of what we call the Braden Head. We talked about water. We have water well sampling at that time, and also had discussions related to the relationship to oil and gas activity and the surface activities. That also was extended in our rulemaking of 2008, where we created a formal review process, an oil and gas location assessment, where we review and operators need to submit with a permit a review of the surface, what's the surface uses that are in play. We also created an electronic permitting process where when a permit comes in, an automatic email goes to the local government, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the wildlife, other agencies, other outside folks that may have a desire to comment on our permit. We also tried to enhance our local government designee program at that time. Hydraulic fracture disclosure, fracfocus.org in 2011, horizontal drilling in the Wattenberg with the 318A. In 2012, we created our groundwater monitoring, where statewide an operator needs to submit a water analysis before they drill, after they complete the well, and at a time frame later in the life of the well, but 4 wells per well. There's a little caveat difference in that Ignacio Blanco, the coal bed methane, and the Wattenberg area, but we created a groundwater rule. Our setback rules in 2012 dealt with many of those issues of noise, odors, emissions, traffic, the encompassing sort of public debate questions. We try to create in the need for operators to submit a best management practice on how they're going to deal with those issues as on individual permits. And then the spill reporting, we increased the reporting to a 1 barrel. The reality is I've given you a snapshot. In this 15-year period, we've actually had 33 various rulemaking changes in how we operate. The public concerns that we hear are on the noise, the air emissions, the spill, the traffic, construction, the disturbed area, and of course the health impacts. The noise, we're trying to, in our new rulemaking, requiring sound mitigation, and that's going at that development plan. Well, you need to come forward with a plan at the very beginning to tell us how you're going to deal with many of these issues. Air emissions, those come under the Department of Public Health and Environment, and they've adopted the recent EPA Quad O rules. They adopted those this year, and I believe they're in effect right now. Traffic, the key point about traffic as an example, that's a local government jurisdiction scenario. So that's why we, as an example, why we solicit the local government's input so we can make sure that the appropriate traffic path, the traffic plan is in place to handle the traffic issues. Next, I want to try to put that in context. I realize this is a kind of a busy slide, so I'd like to kind of walk you through. But what I'm trying to use is, this one actually came from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Controls. But they put in a characterization. If you take a look at the vertical well compared to the horizontal well, if you had wells drilled on a 10-acre spacing, you'd have 64 wells. If you said each well was a 2-acre pad, you'd have a disturbed area of 128 acres. All of that would be distributed around that section. So you're going to have roads, pipelines, multiple facilities, all distributed. Next, if you do a centralized facility, a multi-well pad, those impacts can get reduced. A horizontal well, 16 wells, all drilled from like 1 or 2 pads, you have a reduced roadway impacts, pipelines, and reduced number of facilities. All of these things come into play. So what we've got is a scenario, in a multi-well pad scenario, centralized facility, is an ability to put in those mitigation controls. Sound walls, emission control devices, traffic plans that control the traffic. Our distributed impacts have now been concentrated. That's an issue, no question about it. But it's now become something that's able to be controlled. Sort of a snapshot of economics. If you take a look at just simply what the newspapers are telling us as far as what operators are spending last year in the DJ Basin for their horizontal programs, it was approximately $4 billion with a net effect of a 50-year high in production. If we take a look at the graphical representation of that, what you can see is that oil production, which in the statewide is increasing at about 19%, in the DJ Basin about 26%. Now, operators are drilling for oil right now. They're not drilling for gas. And gas is at a decline. And also you can see that the water production is at a decline. When you drill an oil and gas well, you produce all 3 of those fluids. So why should we care? Natural gas is a reduced emissions fluid. The EPA and the Colorado Department of Health have created some rules related to fugitive emissions. Power plants and vehicles are being converted to natural gas. Manufacturing use of natural gas is on the rise. As far as example, U.S. Steel, as a steel manufacturer, is reopening plants in the United States to manufacture steel. A lot of that steel is utilized by the oil and gas industry. With a positive natural gas supply, long-term contracts are able to be put into place. That's always been considered the constraint of why manufacturing won't utilize natural gas. There is a tax benefit from the production as far as the severance tax to the state and the local government, local counties, getting an ad valorem tax. This is just a snapshot of some of the articles in the newspapers that represent where large oil companies, Exxon buying XTO, ConocoPhillips buying the lease of the Lowry bombing range. Those are two of the major oil and gas companies in the worldwide that are coming back to onshore development. XL and U.S. Steel both converting their plants to natural gas and also fuel vehicles. As far as the economic impact, if we take a look at the University of Colorado Weed School business report on the 2012 revenues, we get that oil and gas activity relates to almost $4 billion with many jobs, direct and indirect jobs. Private landowners receiving $600 million. The public revenues around 1.6 million with a direct severance tax, I think I said million, billions, 1 billion in severance tax and lease payments. Weld County's budget has changed from 18% in 2003 to 34%. What does those revenues go from to the school districts, to the county general budget, back to the cities of Weld County, to some of the water projects that are in infrastructure projects in Weld County. So hopefully I've at least set a stage for your discussion to try to answer some of these questions as y'all move forward, in that what's different today than our grandfather's industry, it's that unconventional play. And there are issues, but many of those issues, the noise, the odor, when you really step away, those are ambient scenarios that everybody wants to talk about. Distance is the solution. In my personal opinion, I think it's wiser to remove the issue. Let's find an engineered method. Let's find a way to mitigate and reduce those emissions, and not look for a one method is the only method. Distance does apply, example, but it's better to remove the issue than to have it be put off onto somebody else. So today's oil and gas industry is definitely different than the past. And as we move forward, trying to deal with these issues of lights, noise, odors, hopefully we can come up with solutions to these problems so that oil and gas industry can coexist with the general public. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions. There's one right there.
Hi, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the actual process. You talked about the drilling and the casing, but then what? Could you walk us through what's actually done from an engineering perspective?
Well, that's a pretty open-ended question, in that I think what you're asking about the life of the well.
Well, but not just the life of, I guess I wouldn't term it as the life of the well. I mean, what do you actually do? Once you do the drilling, then what? I mean, what's the process for extraction? Can you provide some detail about that?
Well, let me try to answer that question. Okay, I drill the well, I cement it, I've isolated my fluids. So now I've got a sealed well bore. What we call is it's called a perforating gun. So it's a shaped charge that will poke about the size of your little finger, a 1/4-inch size holes, in a pattern that will then give the wellbore access to the formation. The next item that occurs is that hydraulic fracturing treatment. So if I would like to characterize, a lot of times what happens is that 1 week to drill the well, then the drill rig will move off. Now, they might do multiple wells at one time, but the drill rig will move off, and then the hydraulic fracturing crew or stimulation crew will move in. They'll perforate that casing and cement. It goes about, that sort of shaped charge will penetrate through the steel, through the cement, and into the rock formation a couple feet. That gives communication between the rock and the wellbore. Now, in a conventional, it'll free flow at that point. In an unconventional, because we don't have permeability, you add the hydraulic fracturing to crack the rocks. And I like to think of it as almost like a freeway. So we've got the little bubbles of oil and gas out in the formation, and then as you crack the rock, it'll then move to the crack, and then it'll flow to the wellbore. So now we have stimulated the well. Now they will have put, when the drill rig moves off, I should have said they put a wellhead on it to control the fluid flow. And they do the treatment down the top of the wellhead. So they've got valves to turn the well on and off. And now in the concept of green completions, they've already hooked up a pipeline for the gas, a pipeline for the oil to a tank. The idea of, it's our 805 rule called green completions. The idea is that as soon as they get done hydraulic fracturing, they will flow the well back. Initially, they're getting a lot of water back, and they might have a tank off to the side where that water flow back, the hydraulic fracturing treatment fluid will flow back to the out of the well and to these tanks off to the side. As soon as it begins to start flowing gas or oil, they'll switch and send it through the production equipment. There are two basic parts to a production equipment. One's called a separator. It may have heat associated with it, but in essence, you then put it in a low pressure environment. I want to go back to that soda pop can analogy where we've opened up the reservoir and the gas comes out. What they'll do is the liquids will come in, it'll hit a screen, kind of misting the oil and water, and the gas and the oil and water will then separate. That's called a separator. At that point, they've got little valves in that separator. The gas will go off to the pipeline, the water will go to a water tank, and the oil will go to a oil tank. Approximately that kind of setup will work for, and the oil well will work for about approximately a couple years on its own internal energy. And then they'll put a downhole pump to lift that oil because the initial reservoir energy is usually depleted. So they'll put a downhole pump in, they'll pump it, it'll run through the production equipment. Part of the idea of a centralized facility is now that I run it through that, I can then run things out to the oil to a pipeline. It's out in Platteville before it gets to a major trunk line that goes to Oklahoma City or another. And a lot of if they don't connect to a pipeline, they'll grab that oil or water by truck, and that truck will go for the water in Colorado, will go to an underground injection well. The oil, if they're trucking it, will either go to that polishing plant or go to Commerce City. It may have been a long answer, but.
No, thank you. That was helpful.
So I guess the question that I have to kind of follow up on that is, looking at the diagram that you had, I see that the natural gas is usually several feet or what have you, kind of below the natural water aquifers that are there. I guess what I'm trying to understand is technically speaking. Yeah, thanks for going back to that slide.
Is this one good? You want the big one, right?
I'm sorry?
This one?
Yeah, that's the one I was looking at. So
so seeing where those hydrocarbons are, they're several layers away from the aquifer. I guess my question is what is in place, or because once all of that rock is fractured, what keeps the oil and natural gas and the fracking fluid from getting up into that aquifer? What safety measures or how big are the fractures? What kind of protects that aquifer in the fracking process?
The general geometry, a lot of times we call it a penny frac. It's kind of the shape, its height is about 300 feet, and the length away from the well bore is about 300 feet, as far as the created fracture.
And just to follow up on that really quickly, so up to that aquifer is about how many feet?
Approximately 5,000 between the aquifer and the hydrocarbon zone. In the Front Range, it's called the Pierre Shale. So the key point is, and I don't want to show that equation, but the confining pressure, the overburden pressure is what confines that frac growth. That's the greatest stress, is the rocks above.
Can I suggest that if we have more questions for Stuart, that you corner him during the break, and then corner him in a nice way, because now is our break, and I'm a big believer in the importance of breaks, and so we will reconvene in 30 minutes, so at 40 after the hour. Thank you, Stuart.